The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
So today is part 3 of this ongoing conversation that I had. 2 different conversations. One I had with Professor Matt Sinkowitz of Boston College, and the other I had with 2 friends of mine who are starting a podcast, the Q&A podcast, Q, and Q Got No Rings on Twitter, at Q Got No Rings on Twitter, and Aaron, who is at Deuce 1042 on Twitter. And the conversation is about media and independent media and how it reflects mainstream media in general. But Professor Sinkowitz and I, we drilled down really deep into this segmentation of audiences and how it's become extremely necessary for people, media organizations to cater to a very specific demographic. And that in doing so, catering to that specific demographic oftentimes causes the hyperpolarization and the demagoguery that we see that ultimately becomes successful. So you don't become successful by being trying to speak to a broader audience. You become successful by speaking as hard as you can to a smaller audience. And this isn't a 100% foolproof theory. We were at a coffee shop and we were just kind of discussing my media in context of a lot of things that are changing around us politically. And so what we're presenting obviously is not, and we joked about this is obviously not something we're going to submit for peer review. But I think that there's something here. There's something to it. If you want to understand any media organization, understand their demographic, and understand how that demographic fits into the broader political conversation. Not just the demographic. It's not just enough to say, The Intercept caters to people who believe that they're anti-establishment. That's good. That's a starting place. But you also have to understand how that demographic fits into the broader political conversation. And if you understand how they fit into the broader political conversation, you can look at the media organization and guaranteed you can pretty much identify every single move that they've made to keep and to grow that base. And a critical part, a critical component in that formula, regardless of what lane this media organization or this political ideology fits into the power structure. And before I go any further, let me just remind you of what we said on Tuesday. On Tuesday, we established 3 lanes, just kind of a working theory, 3 lanes that support the current power structure. That lane is the establishment lane, which consists of both Democrats and Democrats and conservatives and Republicans. They both have media lanes and they all serve the current power structure. We can all agree to that. But the third lane, outside of the Democratic, progressive / liberal lane and the conservative Republican lanes, in media and in politics in general, you have the anti-establishment lane, which ironically reflects and looks exactly like the establishment. They serve the current power structure. The current power structure, as I've, since my very first episode, I wanted to always emphasize that the current power structure in this country has always been white men. If you drill down a little further, it's white Christian men. But now we have this quasi, and this is just tangential. There's this quasi relationship between right-wing Christians and right-wing atheists that we've seen take place all over the world. Right. This is something that Professor Sinkowitz and I kind of posited together on this show back when we were discussing moving the United States moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and the marriage between right-wing conservative religious people, believers, and right-wing nationalist atheists. or non-believers or agnostics or however you want to describe them. And that has been a marriage that's been taking place. So now, whereas Bill O'Reilly said on his clip many years ago that America is run by white Christian men, well, it's not just white Christian men. It hasn't always only been white Christian men, but specifically today, the power structure still is, without question, white men. That's the power structure, regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of their religious affiliation. You can be a Dave Rubin. I'm not 100% sure of his religious affiliation. I'm pretty sure he's either atheist or agnostic, but not 100% sure. But you could be LGBTQ, you could be non-religious and still support this current power structure. Now, I took that long tangent to say that if you look at our media across the board, who they service, who is broadcast, particularly in independent media, looks exactly like that. It doesn't matter if they're Democrat, liberal, or so-called anti-establishment. Why is this important? This is important because how can you honestly challenge the power structure when you have no one outside of the power structure that is represented in independent media in a substantive fashion, or mainstream media for that matter? This is a systemic problem across the board. This is clearly something that's a problem with Republicans and conservatives, but they embrace it. Now you have the foil that is entered into every equation. Every so often you get someone who comes in and is the anti-hero, or they're the antithesis, or they don't reflect. They're the wild card is probably the most accurate way to say it. You have someone who is black who doesn't conform to their expectations of blackness, and that person is elevated and amplified to be a superstar momentarily. It doesn't last. Ask Larry Elder. You probably don't even know who Larry Elder is. Ask Tim Kaine, 999. You have these moments where you can, make a splash as the conservative black person, similarly to that anti-establishment lane. That anti-establishment lane where everyone claims that they're so progressive, which I don't doubt it. Okay, they're progressive for the most part, but they too are looking for black people and people of color who would just simply regurgitate what they believe without ever really making their power structure uncomfortable, without really ever digging into the issues. If I had to summarize it really quickly before I pitch it over to our coffee shop conversation with Professor Sinkowitz, think of it like this. Liberals. Let's talk about liberals, because most of you who listen to my show are progressives, and you don't really want me to make you uncomfortable and talk about you, which is precisely indicative of what I'm talking about. Except my patrons. My patrons are down, but I digress. Take liberals. Take neoliberals, Democratic establishment, corporate shield liberals. They are 100% okay talking about racism if you're talking about it in conservative circles. We've discussed this on the show many times. The moment you begin to talk about the structural racism inside of liberal circles, they start acting exactly like conservatives. Same thing is true for progressive circles, but I'm not going to beat you guys up too much today. It's Friday. But this is precisely the case. And this really determines whether or not someone wants to hear your voice, or they want to just hear you as a person of color say what they want said. This has always been the case. And this is not, again, I have to reiterate, who was it? Abraham Lincoln said, all ideas are new until you read a book. Like, basically saying that all of us think we have some great epiphany, but somebody already wrote about this. I think Cornel West actually wrote about this, and I don't want to credit the wrong person, so I don't know, but I've read this somewhere before, is that you have the black people who are representatives to and explainers to white people. You're not really there to challenge white people. So long as you're not really there to challenge the white power structure in this country, and you're just there as an explainer of blackness to them, you can be fine. You will be fine. And what matters is if you're doing it appropriately in each lane. For example, a DeRay McKesson, he can surely go on the Late Show with Stephen Colbert and discuss systemic racism, mainly as it pertains to Donald Trump and the conservative structure that's been currently in power. But if he goes on there and actually challenges liberal structural racism, he probably would never get invited back. Similarly, Candace Owens, she is a jewel to the conservative movement because she is going to lay everything at the feet of racist Democrats. But the moment she challenges racism inside of conservative circles, which is so ubiquitous, I don't know, she clearly has sold her entire soul. The minute she does that, she's dead on arrival. Her career instantly done. And it is similar in progressive circles. So anyway, and this is reflected in our media. That's the most important thing that you have to understand from this conversation. This is really not about systemic racism so much, not today. It's about how our media refuses to make their audience, their demographic, their core demographic uncomfortable unless it is like, let's say, a CNN, which is all a sport, where they're absolutely there to just make each side mad by arguing about it. But if we're talking about like a Fox News, the hyperpolarized media platforms, MSNBC, if you're talking about, unfortunately, independent media, this phenomenon is exactly the same, and it is an appropriate frame for you to understand how everyone is going to serve their core demographic in whatever message they want to hear. And that's how you make a successful media company in 2018. Hell, that's probably how you've made a successful media company throughout history. All right, enough of my introduction. Let's go to this coffee shop
Basically,
we were at.
The idea was keeping it all under one umbrella. Subsequent to that, like more recently, media is about finding a specific demographic, carving up that audience into a small little piece, and getting devotion from that audience. So there was a period of time where media was about being passable to a lot of people, right? Just being like kind of, okay, cool, I'll watch that show. Yeah. Now we're at the extreme version where media is about finding pretty tight audience, even for like mainstream media, pretty tight audience, and getting them completely devoted to it. So even if it's not explaining our entire political system, the fact that you in the world of political media, you say identity, I think of it as demographics.
Right, yeah, exactly.
And it makes sense. So it's not totally out of nowhere that it would be identity over these other issues, because that is the way we tend to do demographics. Most strongly, right?
Yeah. I think we actually pieced something together here. I don't know. Did we piece anything together?
I think that it's the makings of a way of starting to understand
what the hell is going on around.
Yeah, well, and to me, it's like to understand what you. To me, this is about you. Our conversation started about you. Well, it started about Noah also.
Right.
And it was about,
there's a sub-lane.
Yeah.
And the reason, because since you said it's about me, it made me realize something. I was talking to some guys. I haven't put the podcast out, but we talked on Saturday. And I hope, don't lose your thought, but I have to inject this because I have, since I've come back to Atlanta, found a lane in that it is itself a part of the structure. And it is one where, like you said, you find your community almost. Yeah. And you talk to that community, right? And it's the black church. It's like now I'm here and
long-standing institution.
It's long-standing. Like you don't get any more establishment than that, But I mean, so it's like I'm back in Atlanta, and find myself with an inordinately obscene amount of free time on my hand.
Yeah.
So I've been, going with my wife to church, and then next thing I know, now, they call me up to do stuff, and now I'm presenting. And
well, that's harkening back to that, like, pre-World War II, when media was really localized in a way that wasn't about sort of piecing together a demographic group from across the country, but like in a really thin slice.
Right.
But it's going locally and saying, like, talking to a specific community.
Well, also, but what it does though, it gives you the model of. It's all cyclical. It's hilarious. Like it ebbs and flows, because here it is very localized. It's very focused on the local community and a very specific demographic. But that local community and that very specific demographic is replicated across the country like 100,000 times.
Yes.
So you piece those together, and you now have a national community of localized.
That's the hard part, though, right? The hard part is piecing them together, and not in the process of piecing them together, falling back into the patterns of the
of everything else,
the big strong,
right?
Because how do you maximize those? Well, maybe you have to not talk about this community, which is a little weird, right? Like kind of leave them out a little bit, and all of a sudden you start recreating the structures.
And that's why I mentioned it like I did, because it's still a part of the same structure, same system, same role. You're just speaking to a demographic, and you're using that demographic not in a negative connotation, but they become the people who put you on their shoulders and amplify your voice.
It's not, the way you're describing it is, I think it's a common path people go through when they study media. They often come back to the idea that community media has a lot, and community meaning like literally embodied communities, like your town, your church, whatever, as opposed to so that it's really hard to maintain small media that is dispersed really broadly, where it's like a few people here, a few people there, and they all have the same, like they kind of tend to be interest based, like the baseball card collecting media community, something like that, right?
But locally,
but that's where you have that if you want to actually do something serious, not have it be about collecting troll dolls or whatever, then it needs to have something. If it's going to be small but it's going to be stable, it needs to have an anchor, right? And I think that people who study media often return over and over again. Well, what about community models? What about making media for people who have similar, like, embodied experiences day to day? They go to the same church, they live in the same town, and that is a place that kind of fits in the system. It's always been there. It's been like a small, poor paying piece, but it's always been there.
That's changed.
Maybe, that's changed. You can do all right. Well, okay.
No, you could totally be indigent doing it.
Of course.
You gotta make some right decisions. Like you can't reject everything.
Well, comparatively lower paid.
You can't continuously just reject everything until you're homeless. But it is still nonetheless part of the.
It is part of the system,
of the power structure of this. I laugh at radicals, and I do, because at a point you're going to reject every power structure until you have nothing.
Yeah.
Right. Until you are just the radical on your couch, because you refuse to participate in it, but you realize that they are.
Oh yeah, but you realize just saying this is costing you money. No, but let me go back to what I was saying. Yeah. So what I see, and the point you added makes it even stronger. I'll be a little professory, but the idea is that there was, like I said, there was that growth towards more like individualized or demographic driven media, starting with like cable TV and then coming to the internet. And a lot of people, early internet, said like, oh, this is going to make like really rich and like, sophisticated, specialized media profitable. That the internet was going to do this because it's going to give you a reach, going to give people like you a reach.
Yeah.
And basically what I'm hearing from you, and what makes sense to some extent to me, is that you went through that. There were moments where it worked out, and you were doing pretty well with that sort of approach. But it turned out that you really, in order to do that, need to find ways to continually fit into the major media system, the big stories, the things that, CNN is still setting the story to a significant extent, and if you didn't want to do that, then the internet wasn't going to save you.
Right.
And so what do you do?
Or one of those other lanes that we talked about, but
one of them in there, right? So you were going to have to find one of those lanes to fit in.
Cater to it.
And so what does it turn out? It turns out that the old standby of community media is a place where you can have a relatively unencumbered. All media producers are encumbered. They all have things that they have to do because of they have to do their job. But you can maybe be in a space where you feel a little more free, given that you're only speaking to the smaller community.
Yeah.
And so you sort of return back to that, which is, way back when, the way that you were a small media producer, right, was to find a community and a place and be part of it.
And so it's really funny because we're talking about two communities now, two very small communities, like and I could use me and just, like, I guess we're talking about me, my internet community, which is as close to me as my local church community.
Yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean? They know me.
Yeah.
They know where I'm going, my journey, where I've been, and they know at the core, they know things about me as a media person that, you wouldn't get in a different type of relationship where I'm just performing, right? Where I'm on stage or behind a camera performing for my audience. Like, you don't know Don Lemon.
Yeah,
you have no idea who this guy really is.
Right.
But my people who listen to me, the relationship and the things that we talk even by virtue of just the stories I choose to cover and not cover, and how I choose to cover them. So it's like it's funny. Like, you have a broader community that is dispersed across the internet, but they all come.
Yeah, we have fancy words for this. Media as being space binding or time binding.
Okay,
this is really theoretical, but we've been down this path.
Why not? Let's go.
Space binding meaning that you take people way across the country, all spread out across the world, and bring them together.
Right. So
that's like your internet community. You're sort of a space binder.
Okay.
You bring them all together. Time binding is people who are already kind of together, but you attach them sort of across generations. You let them feel like connected to their past and have a sense of their future. Right. And so I would say that that's interesting, right? You found a way to do, you were able to put together a little bit of each, and maybe that's where you ultimately end up as a satisfied media producer. Yeah,
I mean, because at this point, and I guess to give them the capstone course, right? Yeah. Is the reason, like, why did you get into media, right? And I think that really answers a lot of questions about what lane you choose to be in or choose not to be in. Both of those are very serious, conscious decisions that have long-lasting. And I honestly got into media to have my voice heard, but more importantly, to have my voice heard.
Well, what you're saying, at least what I'm hearing, is to have your voice heard, it has to be both heard and your voice.
Damn right.
Yeah.
That's what it was. Like,
I have a voice heard that happens to be coming out of your mouth.
Right. Which I mean, and we have plenty of time before the game, so we're still good. But which brings me back to what stimulated this thought in the first place is when you said that you got invitations to be here, be there, and then you find it was like, what good is it? Because you're just facilitating a role for them in their lane. They don't really care about what you have to say. They care about how you facilitate that role for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were discussing. We mentioned Erdogan. So I am a professor of communication. I write a bunch of stuff about the Middle East. Write a bunch of stuff about American policy. I'm really critical of America in a lot of ways. Not every single way, but a lot of them. And so I get calls to be on international broadcasters, but not so much anymore because I've turned them down. But I used to get calls from TRT, which is the Turkish broadcaster.
Not TYT.
Not TYT. No, very different.
They might make the same mistake I did.
TRT, which is it's like RT is to Russia, or you could say, if you want to, you could say Voice of America is to America. Yeah. It gets tricky, but it's the same concept, right? It's the government's broadcasting arm, and it's a tricky thing because I know that if they have me on, I'm not going to say anything that I don't think is true.
Right.
But what do they get out of it? Right? They are obviously going to. It's pretty clear to me that they're going to have me come on and say what about this sort of activity that America's engaged in, and I'll say, it's got a lot of problems. Like it's in terms of a media ways in which media outreach is done, or fighting extremism is done, or various things, and that'll be what I say, right? But clearly, the purpose of it is to excuse very similar behavior on the part of their government, right? Yeah. It's to normalize. It's not to critique. And that context is everything in this case, right?
Right. So it's not. It's rarely about they're not bringing you on to hear what you have to say, because part of what you would have to say would also be a critique of their system.
Absolutely. I mean, I would just say that what I would say would just be a critique of their system, because it'd be a critique of policies that use, let's say, the excuse of a quote-unquote free market to make it so, religious minorities don't really have any voice in media that has any reach, right? And I might say that America maybe engages in these sorts of practices in parts of the world, right? But it's not that America does it; it's that it's a bad thing to do,
right?
And the Turks are doing it, and so, and if they would let me just say that, then yeah, maybe.
But they'll cut your mic off.
Oh yeah, you're not going to get. I mean, absolutely not. You have to tag it. America does this. Israel does this. Israel does this. Right, and then they can just cut it and say, "Oh, those guys are bad."
And then exactly. So we actually did we actually are coming to something that's very, very useful, I think, because it's the role that we have to play in these lanes. And it could be here in America, but like you said, it's also, you experience this with Turkey.
Oh, it's international for sure.
It's international.
Especially the way American politics has converged with various authoritarian streams everywhere, right?
So here we are. Like, you as an individual have a critique, have a worldview, have assertions. You want to be heard.
Yeah.
Then you have to ask yourself, do I want to be heard that bad where I start being used in this lane?
The way we put it before, I want to be heard.
Right.
I don't want my voice to. I don't want my. When I say I want my voice to be heard, you don't literally mean the vibrations that come out of your larynx or whatever. Right. You mean you want your ideas to be coming across in a way which is legible and understandable. And I could, they could, in like the case of like being on TRT. They could, without even doing any like really fancy editing, they could just ask me the right questions, and I could answer them truthfully and honestly, and they could broadcast that, and it would be the sounds coming out of my mouth.
Right.
But it wouldn't really be my ideas.
True representation of your ideas, because it's incomplete.
Once it's in that space, it's incomplete in a fundamental way, right? The kind of way where if you say this is not, and they cut that off and then run the rest of the sentence, right? It's the same sort of thing, even if it's everything you say, but it's implied that I'm only talking about America.
So now then, we have this framework, this beginnings of a framework, because we can apply this to the question of Glenn Greenwald going on Fox News.
Yeah.
We can apply this to why I would say, no, thanks, I'm just going to sit, do my podcast from home.
Yeah.
I'm not going to fill a role just to get this job.
Yeah.
Right? There's just like so many instances where we have these questions about why people are doing what they're doing. I could apply this to the Jimmy Dores of the world, who he's playing this particular role, how it fits into this lane, because it's careerism. It really leads you on a path. And as radical as they like to pretend that it is, it's still in the same structure.
No, and I think that's right, but I also feel the need to say that part of the reason I can say no is it's not where my income comes from.
Yeah.
And if it were, I mean,
you might have to say yes.
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, which isn't to say it might not enhance my income if I did it. It could. But
and here it goes back to the fundamental question: is who's the idiot in this equation?
That's true.
You and I, who are sitting here. Well, you're fine. You're
I'm not complaining at all.
Right.
That said, nobody says, "Oh, I don't want more money."
Right.
But I'm not.
But at the end of the day, it's like we're sitting here with this critical analysis, or the beginnings of a critical analysis of the decisions that media people make, and. They're getting paid.
No, yeah, and we're sitting here in a coffee shop in a strip mall.
They're having their conversations,
as much
making 8 figures and broadcasting it to millions of people.
Well, and then it's not something that you can say for yourself, but I'll say I think that at the very least, those options were things that you could have pursued.
Yeah, no, those options were presented to me.
Yeah.
In that third lane, that not the CNN Democratic establishment lane, not the Fox News, because clearly it was never going over there.
Yeah.
But in that lane that gave the appearance of being something unique, which was like the intercept and less identity politics kind of lane.
Yeah.
The opportunities were there. I just they weren't me. They weren't, and because you know when someone wants who you are, but not who you are. They want your identity, but they don't want what you really have to say.
I absolutely. Yeah, I've got. Yeah, I mean, we have very different contexts in which me and you operate, but yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think anybody. I would say the audience in general.
Yeah, everybody knows.
It's like somebody wants like everything that you have, everything that you want to offer. Think of it in terms of relationship, right?
Yeah.
Everybody has a person in their life that absolutely loved you for what you could do, but they just didn't want it from you. You know, it's not apples to apples, but it's a similar sensation. It gives you a similar feeling. Like
cliche, you know, they love the idea of you.
They love the idea of you. Yeah. And if you aren't going to fill that role,
if you're not going to really match up to that idea,
then they got somebody else will.
Yeah. You know? Or at the very least, they'll give it a shot with somebody else.
Yeah. Right. So it's an interesting kind of little hobbled together bootleg theory that we're piecing together here, but I think we actually can understand a lot of these decisions, or at least dissect them in a more constructive way. Like, you know, so let's apply it to one case, and then we'll get out of here. Let's go smoke a hookah or something before the game.
Sounds good.
Let's take the Glenn Greenwald going on Fox News. Is he an example of someone who has something to say, but now he's afforded a lane? Actually, no, let's scratch Glenn, because we actually can go to Anoa.
Anoa,
just as good.
It's sort of on the other side of the political spectrum.
Like, here she is. She has substance and something to offer, a voice to offer on the issues, and in her decision to go on RT, which I've been, not RT, but Sputnik, which I've been on. I don't even know how many times I've been on, but for the same reason as she goes on. Yeah. Because they give her a platform to say what she...
In the context of, and, you know, I just did an interview with Noah on the record, so I don't feel too bad, you know, not speaking for her, I'm just quoting her, essentially. Right. You know, and you could, of course, talk to her about it at length, but just as it fits into our conversation.
Right.
You know, she had very specific experiences of respectable American media institutions willfully ignoring her.
Yeah.
You know, and specific sort of, like, hot issues that she was involved in, they didn't come to her for a quote. Right? And you got to question why, right? Because she wasn't going to fit the narrative that they were trying to tell.
Right.
And so Sputnik comes in, and I mean, she's super smart, so she's fully aware of who they are.
Right.
But they're going to let her talk for herself, and they're going to give her time. And you know, in that context, I mean, that, you know, that's a very different story than Glenn Greenwald.
Yeah.
Glenn Greenwald has no trouble finding somebody to give him...
This is true. Very true.
A space.
Very true.
Right? I mean, they'll do it on the right, they'll do it on the left, in various different ways. In the case with Sputnik and yourself, or people who are
not afforded those spaces.
Yeah, because they don't fit the narrative, or they're just not famous yet, or whatever. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would put it this way. I just think... anybody who judges the you know, that on the simple level, on the level of you're speaking in this context without considering, well, where is this person able to get their voice out, and where aren't they able to get their voice out? I mean, that is basically just trying to boil it down to some sort of simple identity issues or whatever, as opposed to human beings with thoughtful, complex things that they want to say.
Are we asking too much of media companies to actually think?
Yeah, well, I mean, given the systems that we operate under, we are, right? Given that, but the crazy thing about the Anoa story is that NPR was terrible.
I'm finding more and more that NPR is more terrible.
It's because we call them non-corporate. They basically fit into the corporate system just the same, and it's not entirely their. I'm not gonna say it's not. It's not their fault in the way that, like, a child who, you know, like, throws a tantrum. It's not their fault. It isn't, and it isn't, right? In that. You know, so what is NPR? It's public, basically, although it's mostly donation funded and whatever else. Right. But it's a little click on an overwhelmingly commercial dial. What are you going to do? Right. The only thing to do in there is to fight for the demographic that the rest of the commercial stations are not applying to. Anyway, but they, who are supposed to represent sort of like a more cool-headed approach, at least when it comes to Anoa's story, they weren't giving her an opportunity, and when they wrote about her, it was very, very unfair.
It was sandbag.
Absolutely right. And so somebody in that position, I mean, should anybody who gets in that position, should they just say, okay, fine, you win, you have crushed me, and I won't go on the places that are willing to let me talk? I'm not going to say that. I mean, You know, again, back to me and like what I go on TRT. Now, no, I mean, I've got other places that I can talk. I write. I do some other things, you know, I don't know how urgently I have to say anything. But if I had something urgent to say and nobody else would listen,
possible.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I like to think I would only go on any of these platforms to argue with them, to you know, have it out with them, but not to have a piece of my thought used,
like cut out.
Yeah.
You know, but again, you know, and I think that a really important thing that, you know,
I'd like to think that. I want to emphasize that. I'd like to think that.
It's also worth noting that media institutions are not monolithic,
right.
And the one show on Sputnik could actually be, you know, something that is a good place for discourse.
But if we applied it the same to Sputnik, like even my visits, I'll take this onus off of Anoa. Even on my visits, you know, generally what I say, even though it's 100% what I believe, it's still something that I'm offering a critique of the United States versus a critique of Russia. I mean, should every time we go on there and be like, and the same applies to Russia, you know, or whatever.
Well, kind of. I mean, but I guess not, because it's like, on the one hand, it's not what they're talking about,
right?
And you know, and it's also true that we don't apply that standard everywhere. Every time you go on, every single media institution has a lot to critique about it structurally. And every time you go on, you know...
Yeah, you'd be doing it all day.
Every time you go on NPR, you know, you don't have to also say, well, in addition to this topic I'm discussing, I also think that the NPR system is favored to... is structured to favor, you know, the upper middle class white listener or whatever. You don't do that, right? And so...
Yeah, you certainly will never get an invitation.
No, that's right. And so you can't... I will say the one thing that's slightly different is that if you're specifically on there to talk about government oppression, for example,
that's true.
It's a little bit easier of a segue.
Yeah,
you know, and so. But that said, when you're on to talk about whatever, you know, talking about American politics, it seems pretty weird and gratuitous to pivot.
So yeah, it does. Why then? Why do we feel some kind of way? At least me.
Yeah.
Why do I feel some kind of way then about Glenn's appearance on Tucker? If I break it down fundamentally, it's the same problem that Anoa faced on, you know.
Yeah. So first we could point to the
degrees of differences, right, in terms of scale and accessibility.
Yeah,
mainly accessibility.
I think that's the main one.
But also in terms of, you know, something to say and whether or not what you have to say fits the power structure of the platform you're saying it on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think there's two approaches to take to it. One, you just say, you know what, yeah, I mean, if I'm not fundamentally just against people speaking on quote-unquote bad platforms, that I'm not, and let's at least take a case by case.
Right.
And see, what did he actually do in that? Did he set himself up to be used? That's one thing to sort of say, it's okay, right? He should go on that, because I don't like to set a rule that you just don't talk to certain people. I think a better approach, which is the one that you alluded to, is to say, could he have gotten these ideas out without aiding and abetting this utterly... I mean, you know, it gets so tired and boring to say how destructive to
Fox News
democracy and to our lives Fox News is. Could he have gotten those ideas, even to those same people, potentially, or to many, not all, without aiding and abetting? He might have had other options. Whereas if you don't, you don't.
I mean, maybe he shut out of CNN.
Could be. I mean, it could be. And this platform is big, but it's not. It's not like Fox
CNN
News big.
Yeah,
it's not CNN. You can. I put it this way.
I can ask him. I'll ask him.
I would ask him.
Yeah,
that's
all we could do at this point.
Right. I mean, and I would suspect
if he had access to CNN, NBC, or whatever, and he chose to do Fox, then that becomes a problem.
Yeah, or if he had, you know, slightly better access to Fox, and there was going to be a longer segment, or you know, but if it's like a total even tie, then he would have to. I mean, I'm not sure. I suspect he might say he wanted to talk to people who disagreed with him, and that, you know, filter bubble, et cetera, et cetera.
But they didn't disagree with him.
Yeah,
that's why they brought him on.
Yeah, I guess that's the issue, right? Maybe he thought they would, or I don't know.
No.
Yeah, I guess not. Maybe I'm just being. You're right.
Yeah.
Well, his politics are little bit tricky to me.
Yeah,
as is. Like I don't know how to sort of.
He and I, we actually got into it on Twitter for the first time. Like we've disagreed, but we stay out of each other's way.
Oh.
And then I said something that he really hated, and we got in each other's way. But we're cool. But I mentioned that to say because you're gonna have these kind of his politics are strange, like you said, and because of that, there are going to be conflicts. But there are also like intersections where things work out really nicely, and we agree on a lot of stuff,
which is healthy to be clear, right? It's healthy to have people.
Yeah,
we
don't need a
society of Venn diagrams as opposed to circles, right? Like
exactly.
Exactly.
So anyway, Matt, we're gonna get out of here and go hang out before the game. The game starts in about 2 hours.
It's 2 hours from right now.
So we should probably get there. What time?
I mean, we can just get there for first pitch or a little bit later, even. That's okay.
All right.
Well, thanks for having this idea. Hopefully,
thanks for you brought the setup, the microphone.
Did. I was the executive producer.
Yes, you're the executive producer because I was like, I had on my shades, I was sleepy. I'm like, Matt, do I really want to break down all my equipment? And
no.
Matt came to the rescue. So, hey, we'll catch you guys next time.
Thanks.
Yeah, so that was the entire conversation with Professor Sinkowitz, and we ended on the note that I think is perhaps the most salient takeaway for you: access to platforms and what voices have access to platforms and what those voices have to do to get and maintain access to those platforms. And when you're a person of color, it simply has been the case. This is not a controversial statement by any measure. When you are a person of color, you have had to cater. You have had to cater to one of these lanes. Democratic establishment, conservative establishment, or the anti-establishment establishment, because they all support the current power structure. And I mean, again, this is not a controversial statement. As a person of color, you either had to relegate yourself to black media, which has taken a tremendous, or whatever demographic media, but if you're a black person, you relegated yourself to black media. Because for your stories and your voice to be heard unfiltered and unprocessed for this establishment, that was the only place you could go. Which really, I mean, underscores a lot that Professor Sinkowitz is getting ready to put together in his book, what happened with the Noah Chunga and Sputnik / the NPR hit piece. It really underscores all of that in terms of accessibility. But this honestly puts an onus, it puts a responsibility back on the arms, in the hands, or in the lap is what I'm looking for. It puts a responsibility back into the lap also of the Democratic establishment, as well as this so-called independent anti-establishment space. Because you all benefit from us, very much so. You benefit from our clicks. You benefit from our stories. You benefit from our pain. Every time there's a police shooting, you generate thousands of dollars with your clicks on your videos. I mean, you want our solidarity. You want solidarity with us to fight against capitalism on the far left. You want solidarity with us to fight against the Republican Party on the Democratic establishment. You all genuinely want what you can get from us because, you need us. Conservatives just want to put us in our places. And they have people, like Candace Owens to carry out that function. So I don't put any responsibility at their place, any responsibility at their feet. But for those of you who consider yourselves allies to us, in media, you benefit from us, then there is some responsibility to us. Now, whether or not you're going to carry out and act on that is completely irrelevant, or I'm not even suggesting that be the case, because then you get into the question of how do you implement this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. All I know is that this is the reality that we are in, and you are simply either a person trying to cater to this system, and you are going to say all the things that these white folks want you to hear. Thank you to all of my white patrons. Don't go anywhere. You're either just going to say what they want to hear, and then the moment you have an idea or a thought that challenges them, you're out. And I don't know who I'm talking to more, whether I'm talking to the people with the power structure, people with the platforms, or to my fellow people of color, black people specifically, who are, whether you realize it or not, you're catering to this system. Particularly those who feel as though you're not catering to the system because you are in this lane of the so-called anti-establishment. You get this nice release of endorphins because what you're saying goes against the Democratic Party, and you're not really supporting the Republican Party because you're anti-establishment. But at the end of the day, when you say something that challenges this so-called anti-establishment space, you are going to be treated the same as if you were doing it in conservative spaces, or if you were doing it in liberal spaces. It is what it is. And if you don't believe me, challenge the structure that you're in. Challenge the lane that you're in. Forget about the platforms. Forget about access to the platforms for a minute. I'm talking to everyone out there who is a person of color, specifically black people, who are catering to one of these lanes. Now, if you tell me, here's the other option. You can tell me that you don't have any ideas that run contrary to the lane that you're in, then I would just say, keep living, honey. Keep living. And you are going to eventually come to the realization that solidarity has its limitations, and the limitations particularly are exacerbated by issues of race. And it really takes some people who are down for you and not down for what you say that reflects and mirrors what they like to hear. It really takes some white folks who are down with you to ride with you while you expose the systemic racism and the structural racism, particularly in media, as you expose that to your audience. And if you didn't pick up on that, that's a straight shout out to all of my white brothers and sisters who have ridden. Y'all ride with me right now today. Big ups to all of you. Because, you could have done the alternative. You could have shut down an entire company because we pointed out some problems structurally inside of that company. Yeah, that's an inside one. You have to dig back in some old episodes to understand what I'm talking about there. But challenge the system. If you really want to challenge any aspect of the establishment, you have to challenge every aspect of the establishment, even the problems inside of your progressive circles. That's all the time. Part 4 will be out over the weekend or on Monday. I will see you next week. Take care, everyone.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.